Welcome to 2024.
What? No. 2025.
Did you like that new intro? It was a pain to make, so hopefully you did. As you can see, we're in the midst of a wonderful winter storm. This is the second one this week. Or at least second one within the last 7 days. Isn't that nice? So while I'm house locked, I figure I might as well make a video about something that's long overdue. I'm going to interject here because there was something I didn't touch on in this video that I intended on touching on. So I'm recording this part later after the fact. As you can probably tell, it's quite a bit later. In a lot of my videos, I like to go into the history of a particular design because I feel like it's important. And sometimes, in order to understand why a product is designed the way that it's designed, it's important to look at the predecessors and see how things were done before, and how this item in particular is different. It lends a lot of insights. You know, you learn a lot from history. Those that fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. But yet my comment section is always infiltrated by individuals telling me to shut up and get on with it. And while I think that that's highly disrespectful, and both to me and to the actual item and its legacy, fine. If you want to take that route, on your screen somewhere is a timestamp that you can skip to get to the point where I turn the machine, or talk about the machine. There's another timestamp to where I power it on. You can skip all of the story entirely if you really want to go that route. For obvious reasons, probably mostly because I'm biased, I would advise against doing that, but they're your brain cells. You do what you want. When people think of 1990s Macintosh portables, they generally think of something like this, with this design. You know, your typical black and white, or monochrome at the very least, Macintosh, something like the 170 or the 180. This is another model. This is a 145B that has a display problem, which is why I haven't done anything with it. But, you know, pretty typical design. They did have color models. Here's an example, 165C, but other than the fact it's got a smaller color display, a slightly different back panel to accommodate the color display. It's the same basic machine. There was even this, the 150, which was basically the last hurrah for this particular design. It looks the same, with the exception of the logic board and a slightly different display. If I close it, you can see there's a lot less on the back because this is actually, as far as I can remember, this is based on the PowerBook Duo of the time, which is another 90s PowerBook. That was the ultra portable that you used to buy docking stations for. Another design, which really isn't too important, but is important if you're talking about evolution of the Macintosh PowerBook in the 90s, are these PowerBook 500 series machines. They were the first to have a trackpad. Again, they came in color and monochrome models. Slightly different layout there, and a different power supply. But in essence, what Apple did, but they took the 100 series machines with this design and merged it with the 500 series machines with this design, and what they came up with was this, for two different models. This one here is a 190. This is difficult to do because the hinges are extremely brittle. As you might guess, that was a common problem with these machines. This is a 190. They also sold these as the PowerBook 5300. Now the interesting thing about this is that this says PowerPC, but the 190 does not have a PowerPC processor. The 5300 did. So I think that this is actually a bezel off of a 5300. And they just stuck the old 190 badges on it, probably because there was some kind of a problem with the plastics, because again, it's a very common problem with these. See if I can close it on camera. You gotta be very gentle, because they are very fragile. But this is a radically different design. That had a number of flaws. Note that although this is a 190, and the problems between the 5300 and the 190 were effectively shared, although I think the 190 didn't have as many issues as the 5300 because it used a different battery chemistry, and it was a different machine in essence. It was still an old Motorola box as opposed to a PowerPC. I want to talk about them as if they're one and the same for the purposes of this video. And I'm going to call this a 5300 for the purposes of this video because, again, they're basically exactly the same machine. I do have a 5300, but I don't have it handy right now. But the 5300 series was plagued with all kinds of problems, from display failures to hinge problems, even back then, to battery fires. Pausing to talk about the battery here for a minute. You can see here. You see nickel metal hydride. Now this was not the original design. The original plan for at least the 5300, I don't know about the 190, maybe the 190 was going to use these older nickel metal hydride batteries, but the plan was to use lithium ion batteries. These are manufactured by Sony. But there was a major problem with them that caused 2 battery fires to take place. One when the machine was still on the production line, and another, I think, was a pre-production machine that an Apple employee had taken home for testing. Don't quote me on that, I don't have the details absolutely memorized, and someone's probably going to complain, well, you should do more research, and at the end of the day, it's not even the subject of this video, so what really matters is that there were 2 battery fires. Apple was forced to switch from the lithium-ion batteries to nickel metal hydride, and even though none of those troublesome, explosive lithium-ion batteries actually made it to market, well, the media picks up on things, and the public also picked up on things, and thus the 5300 became the butt of many a battery-fired joke. And of course, there was aforementioned hinges, which were a problem even when this thing was new. Now, again, people will look at me and scoff and say, well, the PowerBook 100s and the PowerBook 500s have got all kinds of hinge problems too, so it's not like it's anything new, it's just that Apple doesn't know how to design a display hinge. And you're partially right on that. These do have problems, but these have problems now, when these machines are now 30 plus years old. But I remind you that these PowerBook 5300 and 190 machines had this problem when they were brand new. And it was so bad that Apple had to implement an extended warranty in order to fix these hinges on customers' laptops, because what would happen is they'd get stiff like they are now and would cause little bits of gray plastic, known as PowerBook droppings, to come out of the machine, and eventually it would wear out to the point where the hinge would just break. Apple shipped these machines, the 190 and the 5300 both, with a 45 watt AC adapter, which was not powerful enough for everything that you could put in the expansion bays on this machine. So there were things that you could install. If you loaded this thing up to the nines, you could find that you could no longer power the machine on with the supplied AC adapter. And what's more than that, this is a different design than earlier and later machines, and this is extremely fragile. Oftentimes, it just broke off, which meant you could no longer charge the battery or run the laptop from the power supply. What a pain. I went ahead and dug it out. Here's the power supply for these machines. 5300 and the 190 both. 45 watts with the world's most fragile connector. There were certainly some software problems initially that were generally solved by upgrading the operating system to macOS 7.5.3 or higher. They shipped with 7.5.2, which is kind of an odd release. See, back in those days, Apple relied on either dedicated operating system releases or what were called system enabler extensions in order to operate on certain select models. See, an operating system was designed, or the operating system was released with certain machines in mind, And if you wanted to use a different machine, you had to install what was called a system enabler. You could think of it as being like device drivers for Windows, because in essence that's what it is. It tells the operating system how to access things like the video, the disk subsystem, the expansion bus, etc., etc. On top of that, Apple's initial design centered around a PowerPC 603. The PowerPC 603 was an okay chip, but it had one fatal flaw. There was not enough on-die level 1 cache to allow for fast enough, in the eyes of Apple, Motorola 68K emulation, which was a big deal at the time because Apple was just transitioning away from the Motorola 68K processors to PowerPC. So there was still a lot of Motorola 68K software out there that had to be emulated, and it was slow. So they switched gears to the 603E, which was a better processor, but they did one thing in a cost-cutting measure. They got rid of the level 2 cache, or simply didn't supply it with level 2 cache, which meant that it ran about 30% slower than it should have. And why not? It's not that these machines weren't already completely unappealing. Apple had to sweeten the pot just that much more. So I've done a lot of talking about these machines. What they are, what they turned into, and in the case of that thing, all of its various problems. So what did Apple do about it? Well, the first machine that was released after the disastrous PowerBook 5300 series was this, which is the subject of the video, of course, that we're now getting to. This is a Macintosh PowerBook 1400. In this case, it is a CS. These were sold in two different models, the 1400C and the 1400 CS. The difference between the two? The C had an active matrix display. The CS, which is what this is, has a dual scan passive matrix display. And people love to poo-poo on the passive matrix displays, and they're not entirely out of line in doing so. They're not very good displays. But one has to remember that back in the 90s, when these machines were new, the cost difference between a passive and an active matrix display was incredible. Sometimes on the order of several $1,000s. On top of that, the active matrix displays of the time period were well known to be extremely prone to defect pixels. You know, these days they're almost non-existent. If you've got a dead pixel on your monitor, it's a big deal. Back then, your display had to basically be unusable, peppered with these things, before a manufacturer would even consider a replacement. By contrast, the passive matrix screens didn't have nearly as much problem, and although they had low refresh rate and were kind of go-see, the viewing angles weren't all that great, they were reliable, and they were cheap, which was very important. Another departure from previous PowerBooks is that the active and passive matrix models shared the same screen size. Both of these have an 11.3-inch 800 by 600 resolution display. The PowerBook 1400 series machines were introduced in 1996, late 1996, I think it was October, for a price of about $2,400 US. Again, they were the first new PowerBooks since the 5300, and they feature a completely redesigned chassis. This is almost completely different from the 5300 series that preceded it. Now obviously some of the core design visions and the core logic and the core feature set are pretty much the same. But it's not like there are a lot of similar parts that you could interchange between the two models. But I think really the only thing you could exchange between the two would be something like the hard drive. Like prior models of the Macintosh PowerBook, these used proprietary DRAM cards that came in sizes, I believe, up to 24 megabytes. But one feature of these that was not shared with previous models is that you could piggyback these modules and have more than one on your system. They shipped stock with either 12 megabytes or 16 megabytes on the system board, And piggybacking two of the largest size 24 megabyte modules, I believe you could only piggyback two of them, but piggybacking two modules meant that you could get either a maximum of 60 megabytes if you had 12 megs of onboard RAM, or 64 megabytes if you had a total of 16 on the system board. Looking up here at the front, you can see that this machine has got just a standard boring floppy drive. However, this could be swapped out, sleep swappable, so it's not hot swappable while the machine is running, but it's sleep swappable. You could put the machine in standby mode and you could switch this out. It was swappable for a CD-ROM drive. Initially it was a 6-speed CD-ROM, later models upped that to an 8-speed CD-ROM, which makes this the first of the Macintosh PowerBook line to feature an integrated CD-ROM drive. Like previous models, it features PCMCIA expansion, 2 Type 2, 1 Type 3, with electronic eject, as is Apple's want. Taking a look at the back here, you can see Kensington lock, infrared, pretty similar to previous models. The speaker output and line input, pretty much the same as previous models. There's an ADB port there, as well as an Apple serial port, which I believe is GeoPort compatible. Again, pretty similar to previous models. There is no integrated Ethernet and no integrated modem. Now, you could get integrated Ethernet or modem. That's what this blank is covering up, if this would have happened to have that. But it was an added cost option, and most people just opted for a PCMCIA card. And of course, your HDI 30 SCSI, as with previous models. Overall, it still shares pretty much the same layout for the keyboard, including these arrow keys all in a line, which is odd if you're not used to it. It still has a standard trackpad. It's pretty small but functional. I believe this has stereo speakers, but I'm not 100% sure on that. It might only be monophonic. Of course, you have your brightness and your contrast controls, but there's one thing I haven't shown with this machine yet, and that is the top cover, which ordinarily on a laptop is not really worth looking at. I talked about the CD-ROM drive, and I talked about the stackable memory modules, two innovations that the PowerBook 1400 introduced. The 1400 also introduced another innovation that unfortunately was never duplicated, which is a shame because it's kind of a neat feature. Say hello to the book cover. What this really is, and I'm afraid of breaking this one, so I don't really want to take this apart right now, but the machine shipped in the box with this clear plastic thing, and also an opaque gray plastic insert, or cover, that I guess would have looked something like this. And 6 of these paper designs that you could put into your machine to give it a little bit of personalization and flair. And what's more, the System Restore CD had in the extras section a template for ClarisWorks that would allow you to create your own book covers. Again, it's a neat idea. It's kind of unfortunate that it didn't really stand the test of time, because it doesn't seem to me like it'd be terrifically difficult to do something like that on a laptop, although then again, with the highly integrated nature of laptops these days. Now, of course, Apple didn't get everything perfect with this, because again, they had to, in the name of cheapening things out, skip on the level 2 cache even on this model. The initial model with the 117 MHz PowerPC 603E processor. Later models shipped with a 133 or a 166 MHz PowerPC 603E, and those did, in fact, have a level 2 cache, which made them much better performers than this initial model. Coming back to this cover here, this is more than just a modem slot. This actually leads to a processor direct slot, which would allow you to plug in upgrades. Now, you could install an upgraded processor in that PDS slot. You could install a video card in that processor direct slot, which gave you an external video port. You could install a modem in that processor direct slot, but you could only install one thing, which meant that for everything else, you either did without, or you had to use a PC card in order to expand your machine. One last improvement, you can see that's got a different DC jack. Much sturdier than the old DC jacks of years past with Apple machines. It's a lot harder to break that. Which is not to say that it wasn't possible, but everything's breakable if you try hard enough. In terms of other hardware and software, these machines would have shipped with either a 750 megabyte or a 1 gigabyte hard drive. Not really sure which one this one's rocking, because it's been a while since I powered it on. The onboard modem, if it were shipped with it or had it installed, is a 33.6 modem. The battery, which I believe is a nickel metal hydride type on this, would give you between 1.5 and 4 hours of battery life, which was pretty decent for the time period. It wasn't the greatest, but it certainly wasn't too bad for a nickel metal hydride battery. And these machines shipped with Mac OS 7.5.3, and they could run up to Mac OS 9.1. However, you probably really wouldn't want to do that on a machine like this, especially with the limited amount of memory. To the best of my knowledge, as far as I can remember, this machine is running Mac OS 8.1. Or maybe even Mac OS 8.0, because it's got the floppy drive. But we'll go ahead and we'll take a look at that when we power it on. Speaking of, I believe we are in shape fit to power up. So I have gone ahead and plugged the AC adapter into the wall. Now I haven't plugged it into the laptop yet because I have a feeling that as soon as I plug it in, the laptop will power itself on. Because that seems to be what happens with these machines that have dead CMOS batteries. But without further ado, let's make like Tone Loc and let's do it. And that's exactly what it did. It powered itself on. Here comes the screen. Now this might do some weird things. I have noticed some odd display behavior from this. When it boots into the operating system, the contrast goes nuts. I'm not really entirely sure why it does that. But it's at a pretty standard level now. Let me see, can you see the line? The separation line? And the dual scan display? It's a little difficult. Of course, I am assuming that this hasn't been upgraded with an active matrix screen. And I don't think it has. It certainly doesn't look like it's been upgraded with an active matrix display. But, you know, you never know. Most of the time, the dead giveaway is the presence of only a brightness control. But on a lot of these machines, these Apple systems, they use the same chassis between the active and passive matrix displays, so they still have the brightness and the contrast, even though it makes no sense to have a contrast control on an active matrix display. My apologies for the glare. Suppose I probably could close the window and then have everybody complain that the video is too dark, because people love to complain about everything. See, there's an extension up there in the corner indicating disk activity. Which is a common add-on because, of course, they don't have hard drive LED. In fact, they don't really have any LEDs at all, just a little indication up here in the corner for when it's in standby mode. Really, early machines didn't even have that. I think that was an advent of the PowerBook 500 series machines. We'll go ahead and we'll open up the menu here, or, well, we'll wait for the rest of the system to load, I guess. You can see it's not the fastest thing in the world. And there's definitely a lot in the way of customizations that have been made to this. So, it's definitely a candidate for the reinstallation of the Mac OS. You hear the speakers there. They're not bad speakers. This is running OS 8.0 with a total of 36 megabytes of RAM. So I'm thinking, and I don't know if the system profiler will actually tell me on Mac OS 8.0. I don't think it does. I know the OS 9.1, or sorry, the OS 9 in general system profiler did, because it gave you a little bit more information about how the system was laid out. And yeah, it doesn't really say, it just says that you've got 36 megabytes of memory installed. And this device information is really just for the drives. You can see there's an IBM hard drive in here. Kind of funny. And 775 megabytes in size. So this is packing a 750 megabyte hard drive. This is probably a cheap model when it was due. There's nothing on the SCSI bus. I don't remember, but I believe that there wouldn't be anything on the SCSI bus on this because I think the CD-ROM drive isn't a TAPI, ATAPI CD-ROM device, so it would show up on the ATA controller. But I'm not 100% sure on that. Some networking information, not much. I have tried to get a network card on here and my efforts were fruitless. But yeah, unfortunately we don't get any real information. I'm going to go out on a limb and say this has 12 megabytes of onboard memory and a 24 megabyte RAM card. I think that would really be the only way that you'd end up with 36 megabytes. Unless, well, not even then. No, I wouldn't even have that even then. So that would basically be the only way that you'd end up with 36 megabytes. Just trying to think about ways that you'd be able to get to 36 with 16, that's 20 megabytes. I don't think they made 20 megabyte expansion modules. And I don't think that you could get that. I mean, I know you can piggyback the modules, but I don't think you could get that just doing the math in my head, which is probably not a good thing. Here's a check mark. Coach Pro. Spelling checker. So what this would have been used for, sorry, I'm not 100% sure. Looks like probably emails, and I don't want to go too deep into people's personal documentation, so I'm not going to go far into this. So, I don't know who any of these people are. I don't remember where I got this machine from. I know it came from eBay, but I don't remember exactly where. If we take a look at the 1400 HD, the hard drive here, if we can. Huh. This used to have a get info. I guess there's an extension loaded that's making that disappear. You can see there is a lot of stuff on here. Using up about roughly, what is that, 300 megabytes? Probably something like that. A little bit shy of 300 megabytes. Looking at the dates on these, I believe that they're basically all valid. These ones, yeah, well, they could be. So this was probably upgraded at some point. Of course, these are not going to be correct. Those are going to be, yeah, that's not right. But these 1996, 97 dates are probably accurate. So I would wager to guess that this machine really hasn't seen use since 2001. That would probably make sense. It's probably when someone upgraded to a newer machine that was running Mac OS X. Although 2001 would have been very early days for Mac OS X. But, who knows? Maybe they were tired of their old slow machine. So, there's not much else I can really think of to demonstrate on this. There's not much else I can really do. I will need to reload the Mac OS at some point, and it'll probably get Mac OS 8.0. Just like what it's running now. It might get an earlier release, like 7.6. I haven't decided yet, but Mac OS 8 is probably a good bet for a machine like this. You can see thousands of colors at 800 by 600. You see, it's kind of a little jittery. It gets kind of loud, too. Of course, it's distorting like crazy. So, I don't think there's really much else I can think of to say about the machine. So there you have it. It's a pretty standard Macintosh. I mean, I don't know, maybe we can do a little bit of a typing demonstration. Probably not much, because I don't know where my tripod is right now, and I don't really care to set it up anyway for a short little demonstration that this is. I don't know that this thing actually has. It should have ClarisWorks on it, I would have to think. This is the program folder. Yeah, there is ClarisWorks. MSW, is that Microsoft Word? Yep. More information. We can just do a basic typing test. I'll go ahead and I'll put the camera down and maybe you'll actually be able to see and hear what I'm doing. Huh. Yeah, we're having some problems here. Type it on that keyboard. Yeah, that beep, I believe, is the Coach Pro spell checker telling me I've spelled something wrong. Yeah, that's exactly what it's doing. So, I don't think there's anything really else to look at on this machine. So we'll go ahead and we'll shut down the video. And I'll thank you for watching this video of the PowerBook 1400 CS. Finally, you know, it took long enough to get to it, didn't it? And if you've got any comments, certainly do. Feel free to leave them down below.